Welcome to the Journal of Biophilic Design podcast. Well, many thanks for joining us on the Journal of Biophilic Design today. First of all, just a recap on the news from the previous podcast. We've got a new magazine launching, the Journal of Biophilic Design. It's got over 100 pages of information on plants and the science behind biophilic design, psychology, and loads of other things, architecture, case studies. Today, we are joined by Ryan McQuarrie. He's creative director and founder of Outsidein, based in New Zealand. And I'm not sure if people are aware, but there are Biophilic Design Awards that are run from Canada by a chap called Elliot Bennett of iPlants magazine, and I was a judge on the awards. The Diamond Award winner, which was won by Outsidein, is absolutely stunning. If you're into biophilic design, if you're into workplace design, you have to have a look at it. That's all I'm saying. You just have to look. It's beautiful. It's just every office should be built like this. I think even every healthcare unit and every school, every home should have this kind of walkthrough and everything. But I'm not going to talk about it. I'm going to let Ryan try and describe it and tell us more about it. But first of all, Ryan, many thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, it's good to be with you, Ness, and right from this other world. Thanks for having me.
That's great. Well, thanks for waking up at 5 o'clock in the morning, people. He's woken up at 5 o'clock in the morning at New Zealand time to talk to me at 5 o'clock UK time. So I think I've got the best end of the straw. But can you tell us a little bit, first of all, a little bit about Outsidein, if you don't mind?
Yeah, of course. So Outsidein, we are a bespoke greenery company down here in New Zealand, and what we do is we basically merge nature and design together, and that's sort of our sweet spot. So we do a lot of stuff, primarily indoors, doing greenscaping indoors, but also work on the exterior of buildings and sort of anything related to urban greenery. So we do green roofs and green walls, and then we do kind of any sort of greenery indoors, and we also do some kind of special exterior landscaping type of projects as well, and that's right across the country here in New Zealand. So we're sort of the largest service offer in New Zealand for our type of work.
That's lovely, fantastic. And I'm going to put a link to your website on the blurb that goes with this. So again, if you're listening to this podcast on your run, when you finish, make sure you stop and have a look at it and click through and look at the amazing, beautiful, inspiring projects that you do. And I'm really, really thrilled to have you here. Can I ask you personally, what got you into sort of plants and design? What was your pathway?
Yeah, well, early on, it dates back to sort of childhood. My grandfather lived about a half a mile from my house, and he was a kindergartner. And so every day after school, I'd jump on my bike and ride over to Grandma and Grandpa's house to hang out, because they just had better snacks than what we had. And they let me have some fizzy drink, and my parents wanted. So I thought that was cool. But I'd go and hang out with Grandpa, and he had this large vegetable garden. And so over time, I'd just kind of follow him around the garden, and then as time went on, if they went on holiday, they'd ask me to look after it, and then after a while, I would help sort of plant it and look after it. And I really looked up to my grandpa. He was one of my best friends, and so I just watched how he did it, and it was quite exciting, planting something and then getting to come back and reap the rewards, the harvest, and I thought it was pretty special. So it was sort of out of that admiration for my grandfather and just that interest of getting to be involved with it and see the garden happen. And he would usually, sort of pay me some pocket money if I looked after it and help in the garden. So that helped. And so that's where it started. And then as I went through school, my summer job was always, I'd go and work for a landscaping company. And this is in California. So I grew up in California, actually, not New Zealand.
Okay.
Yeah. And so I'd kind of landscape through the summers. And then once I finished school, a friend of mine, we were, I think, 17 years old. We started a landscaping company together at 17, and started doing landscape and design work. And so my passion just kind of grew from there. I didn't study horticulture at university. I studied business, but basically, like, kind of the goal was to be able to merge my passion and grow some sort of business skills to put those two together. So when I moved to New Zealand after uni, to sort of, you know, follow the love of my life, who was a Kiwi, I found myself in New Zealand and started, you know, once again started another landscaping company, landscape and design. We sort of did like the high-end residential landscape type projects, and so we would travel around the country doing these really amazing one-off huge gardens, you know, on the beach, on an island, or whatnot. It was quite enjoyable. And I sold that maybe 10 years ago, and I found myself sort of looking for something else to do. And I was always interested in like the green technology. Like I was always watching people doing the green walls early on, like when they were just a thing, you know, and Patrick Blanc, and looking at some of the people around the world that were doing these early green walls. And I thought, oh, that's cool. You know, that's really niche. And you know, see someone hanging off of a building on a rope, you know, maintaining a green wall. I thought that's pretty special. And so I started kind of thinking, how could I apply what I learned in landscape and design to this indoor area? And at that time in New Zealand, that like indoor greenery was a thing, but it wasn't what it is now. It was sort of like a pot in a corner, you know, a pot and a plant in a corner, you know, and it wasn't very interesting stuff. Like you seem to see the same thing anywhere where you went. You go to a hotel, and there was like, you know, as a white or a black pot in the lobby and a couple of plants. So, you know, I looked at that and I was like, well, if I've learned anything in like the landscape and design experience I've had, is that really you have to start with great design. Like a great project is not going to go anywhere without starting with great design first. And so I looked at our industry in New Zealand, and I realized that it was sort of like salespeople going out and determining where these pots and plants would be put in a building. And I was like, well, so you're getting a salesperson to design the greenery, and then I look at the buildings that are being built, and I was like, well, they're beautiful new buildings. Yeah. A client might not, you know, they'd hire the best architect in the country, and this architect is going to just pour over every detail of the building, look at the materials being used, and be very intentional about the materials that get used, and then at the end of the project might get handed over to the client, and the client might say to somebody on the team, hey, go find us some plants, and they call around and they get 3 quotes, and lo and behold, a salesperson comes and decides where what pot to put in. And I found that often like this process sort of bastardized the beautiful work of an architect, because the architect cares so much about materiality and the look and the feel, and then a salesperson comes in with no design background and says, hey, you could have 2 pots, and we'll hire them to you. And I found out actually the reason why the pots were always so ugly is because since the industry was sort of hiring plants, right, that's the model, hire, like leasing plants, and that reason was because a lot of offices, they might not be good at looking after plants. They're good at, you know, I don't know, accounting or legal work, whatever it might be, but they're not great at looking after plants. And so they didn't want to have to do that. They didn't want to have to buy plants, and then when someone on the team killed it, go and buy another one. So so this hire industry emerged, and so the models, like I thought, was sort of flawed, because it's incentivized by reusing the same pot over and over again, right? So if a company hires an office at this pot, say it's like a black or a white, or I used to see a lot of red pots, like shiny red pots, right? Like some ugly stuff. Okay, so they hire a pot to a company, and then if the company decides that they no longer need the plants and they move on, then the hire plant company wants to rehire that same pot to someone else. Yeah. And over time, they want to just keep rehiring that pot, because that's how they make more money off of this pot. Yeah. And so they're incentivized to kind of get something pretty basic and keep reusing it.
Mm.
as I came into this with like sort of fresh eyes. I guess that's like the nice thing. Like I never worked in for a higher pay company. I didn't know how it worked, but I worked in landscape and design, and I got to work with some of the best designers in our country.
Mm.
And I just really observed the process where you start by understanding the clients and their needs, and you start with great design, and you design something really special, and then you apply like a craftsman's skill to it, and build this beautiful vision. And at the end, you stand back, and we would get to work on projects that were sort of, you know, very impressive. And so we looked at this interior plantscaping world and with the same lens, and I said, oh, that's it. Like, we're not going to hire a salesperson. We're not going to hire a single salesperson. We're just going to hire designers, and we're going to go and get to know the architect and understand like what they had envisioned for the space. And then we're just going to be this like consultant that really knows that understands plants and design. And we're just going to help them do the plant side of things really well, but in a way that's like integrated into the architecture of the building, right? So and so that's how we started, and it's just gone really well. And basically the same things happen for what happened in the landscaping world. We'd stand back at the end of each project that we get to install, and we go, wow, that is beautiful, you know. And the clients are like, oh, this is amazing, and this changes our space. And I don't think they had that same response, you know, 10 years ago when they're getting a red or black pot in their lobby, you know. So you know, and I think we got the timing fairly right as well, because people are so much more conscious of wellness in the workplace, and wanting to look after employees, and wanting to connect it back to nature. And there's like all these kind of all these like factors are working at the same time, you know, like people becoming more aware of climate change and sustainability, wellness, starting to fall in love with houseplants. And then we're sitting here kind of going, hey, well, we'll design something that's in keeping with the architect's, you know, vision for your space. So that's been like that's the long version of how I got into it. But yeah, it does start right back with grandpa George, you know, in the garden. I was a kid, probably 5 or 6, chasing them around and learning how to, you know, plant tomatoes and you know, plant out his veggie garden and getting to look after it for him. So and to be honest, I've carried that right through into my own life. It's probably interesting to know like how important it is to me, because we moved out of the city as a family. We've got young kids, and we said, well, we were living in the city, and we've moved to a property where it's native bush. So in New Zealand we call it the forest bush. It's a forest. It's the native forest. I don't know why they call it the bush. And so we have a block of bush that's like hundreds of years old, and we built our house in the middle of it.
Wow.
And so, you know, like I've kind of adopted this in so many areas of life where we're like, hey, we want our kids to be interacting with nature. Let's build a house that is, and my wife's an interior designer. She actually designed our house. And so the whole point of where we live is that it's all about connecting to nature. And so all the windows and the views, like it all like really is well planned out so that you have these beautiful views out over nature. We can look out to the sea from over the trees, and it's like it's actually really like people come here and they're just like, oh, you know, like they sort of like take a load off and sort of put their worries aside, because they're walking in the house, and it's like and it ties back to biophilic design, like a lot of natural materials and stuff in our house, because it sort of had to be, because we're in the bush, right? So and so you sit and you kind of like, we've got a window seat that looks out over the top of the trees, and you just can sit there with a coffee, and I'm just like, oh, like it is like an escape from the busyness of life. And it recharges, and that's why I'm up so early, because I try and get up and see the sunrise, and and just for that little bit of like connection to nature in the morning. So yeah, we really live and breathe it. We sort of have a very extensive veggie garden, and we just love it. Get the kids stuck in and grow a lot of produce. So it's very fun. Yeah.
Oh, that sounds absolutely perfect. It sounds like you say, just having had those views, and like watching the sunrise and having a view of water, and like the whole blue mind thing, and just everything. What an amazing space. And people who might want to watch this on YouTube, behind Ryan, there's beautiful oak carving that he explained to me before, and so you'll see this is beautiful. So yeah, I can just imagine what the rest of your house is like. I should imagine it's very organic and sort of and relaxing and beautiful and awe-inspiring, and and you'll be able to breathe in there. And I think your whole, like, your journey into doing what you do, I think is really again inspiring and fascinating. But I love the fact that your company is called Outsidein, and you're living it. You're working, and your family and everything, and you are living like this sort of perfect union of nature and life. It's how we should be. It's like, as much as we can with new technology and all that, bringing the best of what we have, but being able to flourish somewhere. It sounds amazing. Really, really does. So thanks for sharing that, Ryan. Obviously you mentioned biophilic design and the house and the space and everything that you described there just sounded like the perfect biophilically designed house. And obviously if your wife is an interior designer, then obviously she must be using those principles too, and you both of you are embracing that. Can you explain to us really why biophilic design is important, to yourself obviously, but just generally as well?
Yeah, I mean, before I knew what biophilic design was, I was designing with the biophilic design principles very much, because I sort of, when I was working in the exterior landscaping area and residential, I got to work under this really brilliant designer, landscape architect designer here in New Zealand, and he's really been a mentor to me. And he would teach me how he designed a property, and we'd stand back and look, and it was always like, basically design it the way that nature would. If you want it to really look like, if you really want it to be special, like, design the way that nature designs. And so I started like kind of thinking about that, and then I'd try it, and then I'd look and I'd stand back. And it's very much related to plant. Like, he's a really amazing plantsman, like an encyclopedia of plants. And so I learned like just the kind of principles of designing the way that nature did. And as you do that, you stand back and you look, and your eye just goes like, oh, there's something right about that. Like, oh, that just makes sense. And then the more you do that, the more that you want to spend time in those spaces that are designed with in that regard. And so and I think that and we're sort of fortunate in New Zealand that we have a lot of space. Like, a lot of properties have space and have views, and they might be near the water, and so you can really tie design into the landscape around. And so that might have like been using, for example, it would always be like, what's the local rock? If we're going to build rock walls, what's the local rock? And so you're using a natural element that comes from that local environment. And then you'd be going, what plants are going to do well in this environment? We might do projects around the country, and so what plants are going to do well? Well, you got to look and see what's thriving, and it's usually like that. It's usually the indigenous plants that are tolerant of that area. And when you use those materials, the local rock and the local plants, that the landscape just ties together. And so, and then if you design it in a way that's like mimics the way that nature designs, or the way that nature is designed, then you really start to create something special. And so I think that was before I even knew what biophilic design typically technically was. But we've brought that indoors, and I've just found that if you're not, we used to just see so many corporate environments that were just like really sterile, really harsh, and you kind of felt like you're in this 90s office, like you're like, oh, like, the light is the light is jarring, the space is cold, and forced and sterile. And I'm like, you just found that you didn't want to actually be in there. You kind of would go and work there because you had to, but you didn't want to be there. And as soon as you were done working, you would go and try and find something that you want to do and spend time in, so and so like it sort of evolved naturally for me, where we have seen, and we I guess I'm fortunate that I get to work with the best architects around the country, and we're just seeing the projects that, at least my favorite projects are the ones where the architect has really carefully picked materials that that create a space that you want to be in, and it's often natural materials, and then the spaces where you want to be in often have like natural light and or a view out to nature, and then the plants, we try and integrate the plants really seamlessly into this design space. And I would find that it sort of comes back to that landscape design principle, like start with the design first. Like I guess you could say start with the end in mind, but if you start with beautiful, like really well thought out design in the beginning and use these natural materials, I would find that those are the spaces that I was the most proud of, or that I enjoyed being in the most. And so that, for me, that's really what biophilic design is that it's like, you're designing spaces that people are naturally going to sit in. They might not know why, but they're going to sit there and be like, oh, like they're probably, in a busy work environment, maybe stressed out, or working very hard, and they won't consciously know what you've done, but you've given them like a gift. And that gift is that they're going to be able to sit there in the office and just kind of go like, they might just look out a window and see some nature and be like, have a pause for a moment, or they just might be like, wow, just feels nice to sit in. And so and I've seen, my wife did the same thing, as she creates spaces that people are drawn to, that they want to be in. And it's because these materials are natural, and there's views out to nature, and there's just like this aesthetic appeal when you pull all these things together really in a really thoughtful way. People just are drawn to be there. And that's okay. So like, I'd almost say it's good hospitality.
Okay.
Right. Like,
yeah.
Hospitality is like, I, in my opinion, creating a space that people feel comfortable in, and making them feel comfortable. And so mine, and I think that's the true sense of hospitality. It's like the gift of like, creating a place that's comfortable for someone. And so, biophilic design does that by designing a way that is using natural materials and integrating those kind of natural elements into the space in a way where you just like, this feels like nice to be in.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? What do you think? What do you reckon?
Yeah, no, I that's I couldn't actually describe it better. I think that's lovely. When you just said you're giving people a gift, I mean, that's just lovely. To give someone that gift of relief and being able to breathe. I mean, I often sort of think of like biophilic design spaces where somewhere where you can go and actually take a breath in and breathe and take a moment and just reconnect with yourself and just unwind, basically. And you mentioned hospitality. I interviewed Gary Thornton as Associate Lighting Director at Multi Lighting, actually, just recently, as the podcast it will be up by the time this goes out. And he mentions about creating spaces that are used in hospitality, actually, because then you bring that warmth and that he was talking about sort of dynamic lighting and zoning and stuff like that. But why not create places? We don't need to have like offices and workspaces that are like factories and things. It's not right for us. We're not meant to be in harsh environments like that. We're supposed to be in like caves or things made of wood and it's just we just get sick when it's not. So I'd like to talk about the the design that you created. I think it's just, again, if people have just got to this point of the podcast and just like to scroll and just to find out what it's about, and you've got to this point, please do go onto the website and have a look at the images, and go to Outsidein website as well. And honestly, it is, if you could design, if anyone here listening is thinking about designing an office with biophilic design, I think this is lovely, because there's so many different elements in it. Obviously, there's the planting and the landscaping, the shapes and the pathways and the curving lines, but you've also used the inner space. There was like local craftsmen, craftspeople had produced stuff, so there was all elements that echoed the local space and the country, and that, I know that was an important element of the brief. But could you explain a little bit about what the client wanted? I mean, it was a litigation firm, wasn't it? So could you maybe explain a little bit of, kind of sort of set the scene really of what the challenge was that you had?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so it's a local legal office, and they're the country's crown solicitor. So that means that they do a lot of work for the crown.
Yeah.
And so it's a big law office. They really they basically got the cream of the crop as far as offices. So it was a brand new building.
Yeah.
It was a full 6-star Green Star building, the base build, and they got the top couple floors of it. So it's just this beautiful building. And the client came to us. Actually, the client came to an architect first, and said, "Hey, I want to create something that brings basically nature indoors." They loved going on these big long outdoor walks, and really challenged the architect. And the architect, I'm good friends with the architect. So the architect came to us and called me right after the meeting and said, "Oh man, I've got a challenge for you." And so this was the challenge that the CEO of the company, she went down to in New Zealand, we have a series of what we call like the Great Walks.
Okay.
And they're really these like very special for like bushwalks in remote places of the country, and they're like just absolutely beautiful. And the CEO had done this like 5-day walk, in it's called the Root Burn Track. It's just this beautiful walk. And she came back. She's a very busy CEO. She came back and she was just like, "Oh man, I feel so refreshed and restored from going on that walk. I want to recreate that in my office." Wow. So that people feel that same way that I did on that walk when they come to work. She's wow. She's quite an amazing lady, like really visionary. And so she said, as I walk through this kind of winding walkway, where the path was cut, there would be moss growing on the south facing. We're on the other side of the globe from you. So our shady side is the south, not and for you guys it's the north. But and so this cut of land came down to the footpath, and the moss was growing on it along, and plants were growing out. And she was like, it was just like it would dampen the sound, and it was just like cool. It was that cool feeling of walking in the bush, different temperature. And she's like, "I want to recreate that when you come into our office." And we're like, "Okay, yeah, that's all right. Like, we can have a go." And so we basically that was the brief. Like, bring that experience into our office in the middle of the city, in this brand new gorgeous 6-star Green Star building. Wow. And so the core concept was, over the 2 floors we would create, basically think of like a large atrium, like actually think more of like a terrarium, that's completely enclosed. And you know how it's like completely enclosed in glass, and the plants just grow naturally and can keep growing. So basically there's these 2 large atriums completely enclosed in glass, and all of their meeting rooms were dotted throughout the space. And we decided to make them completely temperature controlled. So as you walked in, you get that cool feeling. It was a lower temperature than the rest of the office.
Wow.
And all of the lighting was specially designed. So the lighting was a slightly different ambient temperature than the rest of the office. And there's like the sound, there's actually some nature sounds playing as you walk in. And then we had the task of creating this, how do we integrate nature into the space in a way that feels very natural, like feels like you're walking on a path. And so basically we kind of set to, we said, you know, like, well, we can't have like troughs that the plants sit in, because like those straight lines are just so unnatural, right? So okay, well, we want actually natural form to the space, and whatever holds the plants has got to be a natural form. And so really we designed a way of building like a structure that the plants could sit in that was very, very much like what you'd see in the walking on one of these great walks around the country. So we designed the structure, and it was all natural in form. Like there was like it was all like free form shapes, and then like also the land had to curve down and integrate into basically like the concrete slab. And so yeah, we created it sort of felt like you know, Peter Jackson building like a movie set. You know, like, and they've got their team like trying to recreate something indoors, and so that was sort of felt like what we were doing. And we basically did it. We designed this atrium. It was 5,500 square meters.
Wow.
Completely enclosed, temperature controlled. All the lighting in the space was actually grow light, ambient grow lights. There was no other lights in the space.
Okay.
And because we wanted all the plants to be able to grow really well.
Yeah.
And then we brought in just like an amazing assortment of plants, and just really planted out at basically a replica of the New Zealand native bush in their office. And then we covered the floor with moss as well. So, you know, that was very much like what you'd experience here in New Zealand. And so we didn't know if it was possible when we set out. We thought we'd give it a crack. And when we handed over the space to the client, you know, undoubtedly every single person that walked into this atrium, they just like stopped, and they're just like, what?
Yeah.
Like how is this possible? And yeah, so it was very fun to be a part of. I was like, we're super proud of our team, and like you said, it was nice. It was very humbling to win the Biophilic Design Award and also the International Landscaping Award for this space. You know, so it was very very, very humbling. So
yeah, and it's incredibly well deserved. I mean, you know, it's outstanding. I mean, it really is. I think it should be an exemplar for every, you know, office design. And what a a lot of forethought that the CEO's got. You know, obviously she's in touch with nature and that, but I mean, that's also a generous natured spirited CEO to want to share that with their staff, because they know that the relief you get. And I mean, ultimately, you know, you're going to get more out of your staff, aren't you? People are going to be happier, and they're going to have more relief. They're going to get more respite. They're going to go back and be refreshed and you know, and attack those things that have got to be attacked. You know, whether it's a pile of paperwork, or it's a district attorney in their case. You know, so actually creating. I mean, that's fantastic. You know, let's hope all the CEOs listening kind of go, oh, yeah, I want to bring elements of their favorite space or somewhere where they've been, that really you know, gives them something. But then, you know, that's just evidence in itself, isn't it, that we all go somewhere in nature. I mean, I've just come back from the hospital from visiting my mum, and we just sat outside. I've just got to sit in a field with a cup of coffee and just sit. Do you know what I mean? It was just like, I've just got just to wash everything away, and all the cold walls and everything, and the stress and the arguments and the, you know what I mean, that sort of. And so it's so good. It's just an inherent need in us, isn't it, to do that. I mean,
I think you're spot on. Like imagine if the health system did that.
I know.
Like imagine if they created spaces in that same way, how different your experience would be. You know?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I'm actually I'm launching a campaign here in the UK to lobby the government to bring biophilic design into every NHS. So
Oh, amazing.
yeah,
Wow.
apparently, and the more I'm reaching out, there's like pockets of people that are doing this in different NHSs, but it's not joined up.
Yeah.
But you know what I mean?
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the reason I set this up was because both my parents were in hospital at the time, and you know they were
Oh,
experiencing a challenging situation, and I'd heard about biophilic design, so I took in I'm a photographer, so I took in my images of nature printed on metal that could be cleaned, chemical resistant, and I'm like, and her blood pressure came down, she started focusing. There were, the nurses and the doctors were going, wow, this is lovely in here, and I'm thinking there's something in this.
yeah.
So being the nerd that
Yeah.
I am, I went off and researched it, but yeah, I just wouldn't it be amazing? I
Wow.
mean, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Wow.
even
We
it's a waiting area. You go on, sorry.
I think there's hope for that industry. I think there's hope because like it is really gaining momentum. The principles of biophilic design, and then the research that follows it. And we had never we'd never done anything in the health space in New Zealand before. We'd done like a couple of private practices and stuff, but nothing for the public realm. And I have to admit, I'm designing a space at the moment for the public health system in New Zealand that's probably more impressive than this Meredith Corner office.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
It is just, yeah, it is just like amazing. Yeah, like I have no idea the politics to go on behind the public health system and who's behind it, but to be honest, like there's somebody that's driving this that's got an incredible vision.
Yeah.
And like it's amazing. It's going to be actually amazing because our health system really got hammered through the last few years, and our doctors and nurses and medical teams are like really burnt out and stressed, and that it's not like the most pleasant environment to work in.
No.
Actually, it's probably one of the least pleasant environments to work in, and or to visit, and so we're creating this atrium where all of the recovery rooms look out into this atrium that's like basically a garden on steroids, like sort of Singapore level, and
Wow.
and then there's like sort of closed off areas where the medical teams can sit in the garden and recover that are closed off from the rest of the public spaces. And but then there's like public areas where family members could come in and have a cup of coffee in the garden. So I think there's hope. There's a number of large health projects that we're starting to work on at the moment here. So and for me, I'm like yes, like that's the good stuff. Like, hey, like if we can start to change the experience that people have when they're stressed out going to see a family member in pain, like if we can just make that experience a little bit better, then how like once again what a nice gift, yeah. It's fun. It's funny, like that's like you gotta have to sort of stand back and think like why do I get up in the morning? Why do I get up at 5 o'clock in the morning? And like it's nice. I'm not like selling cigarettes or potato chips. Like I actually get to we get to work on stuff that does make someone's day a bit more enjoyable, and whether they work in an office or go visit someone in a hospital or go shopping in a shopping mall. So it's such enjoyable work, if it's done well, if it's designed well, and if it's executed really well.
Yeah. Oh, it sounds fantastic. Well, it sounds like you really, really absolutely love what you do, and you're very talented at what you do, and you've got great vision too. And you can feel that in you, and you're coming at it from a good place, because you're giving people gifts, gifts of life around them. I think that's wonderful. We're coming sort of near the end, but there's a couple of questions I do want to ask you. just circling back to the workplace, I mean, is there a space, I mean, we've obviously healthcare we spoke about, but within the workplace itself, is there somewhere in the workplace that you think biophilic design would be a really good place? You definitely need to have, but some elements of biophilic design or planting in.
Yeah, I think like really, I'm trying to think of a space where there isn't a need for it. And nothing comes to mind. We've really seen it. We've been fortunate to work on a really broad range of projects that impact a lot of different industries.
Yeah.
I think that there's some that are hard. Like there is some that are hard. Like say like a machine shop. Like or a factory. Like say a factory. That's a very hard space to integrate nature into. Often they're like designed very specifically just for flow of materials or manufacturing goods, and anything else that gets in the way is just like shouldn't be there. So I think I think for those kind of spaces, it's more about, can you create a respite where the staff that are working in that space can go have a break during the day, and then so that would be quite visionary for an employer, say like Elon Musk. He's got these huge factories. They would, I imagine they'd be devoid of plants, because that just would be getting in the way. But I think it would probably, a visionary in that space would want to create areas of respite where their employees could escape from that and go and sit down and have a beautiful view of nature, and sort of refresh, and then give them the opportunity throughout the day to do that regularly. I think that would probably help in those kind of spaces. But hey, look at, like, we're really seeing office spaces gravitate to the idea of integrating nature into their space, and then because I think they're starting to realize that not only the benefits of doing it, but also the downside of not doing it. Like if you don't do it, if everyone else has a beautiful space and they want to be there, they want to work there, and you don't do that, you don't invest into that, like how much harder is it going to be for you to attract talent and get employees to your space in a time when it's very hard, at least in New Zealand, unemployment rate's 3%. So there's it's basically like almost everyone has a job. It's very hard to attract staff. Like that was probably the key vision of this this litigation CEO. She actually realized that if she created a space that people wanted to work in, that she'd also be able to attract world-class talent. So it's favorable from so many ways that you look at it. Like you create a beautiful space, people want to be there. You're going to attract great talent. They're probably going to do better work because they're working in an environment that's more conducive to really good work versus a sterile environment. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah, so if you're got a space, particularly we've been working from home, a lot of us have, and we're used to that comfort of our home and being able to control what we're doing. And it's like where I am, I've got plants all around me and soft furnishings, and I can just go and sit outside if I want to, and I could go and work outside if I want. Why would I bother going back to an office where there's like four walls and I haven't got control of lighting or sound or anything else? And it's like, so yeah, if you can create environments where people feel comfortable, and feel at home and their heart sings, then it's a win-win, isn't it, really? So before I ask you the final question, is there anything else you'd like to add?
I mean, I think there's like another element where like primarily we've been talking about bringing this into the interior spaces, and what I've found, the more work we do, the more I think it's important to kind of to do the whole urban experience in this way. So yeah, I mean, you look at places like Singapore and you're like, wow, like that's just,
I know,
that's really setting an amazing example. And so I think I love to see more cities designed that way, and there's just so many benefits of it. Like we're actually really seeing the benefits of a green roof, and that the way it changes the the thermodynamics of the building, and like the cooling and the heating, and then you could use these types of features to filter stormwater, and so that, you know, before the water gets to your waterways, it's been filtered through the planting and stuff. And I'm like, oh yeah, okay, there's a real big opportunity there. We want to really crack into that in the near future as a company, and so we're starting to look at, you know, how do you help. So for an example, like as a perfect example, a shopping mall that we're working on, we're taking all of their food scraps from inside and turning the and they have these huge commercial composting stations where they can turn all of their food scraps into compost.
Oh, wow.
And then building out a ton of veggie gardens for the community, and orchard. And so then putting the compost in the veggie gardens, and then integrating beehives into the design and bee gardens, and then we're like collecting their rainwater off the building and using that to water the gardens. So I think like that's the next step of building really beautiful cities, and biophilic design is like, how do we start to design the whole city experience, you know, where so many people are living? How do we start to do that in a way that's like really seamless, like you really are benefiting from engaging with nature? So I'm looking forward to seeing the local community around the shopping mall, like go and walk to the shopping mall, and then like be surprised there's like these veggie gardens that then have like signs that'll say like, oh, pick me, you know, like and there'll be orchard fruit like that they can pick, and they'll be able to, and then we'll kind of have like a journey that they go through, and they get to learn about where the compost has come from and where the rainwater has come from, and so I'm quite passionate about that. I think that if we can also integrate food into the experience, and where the food comes from, bees are very important. Harvesting rainwater, like there's a whole experience there that is like kind of still pretty young in its like life cycle, and I'd love to see cities where you're kind of walking through the city, and you're having this experience where like nature, it just feels like the experience is natural and productive, and then you get into the building and it's the same. And like I think that would really change the way people experience life. And I think that would help actually with a lot of like the stress issues at the moment, and just a lot of people's outlook on life. I think it would help change it. That'd be pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think as well with food security, people not understanding where food comes from, and just like, you know, buying a load of stuff and then throwing it all away. If you realize, oh, you know, seasonal eating and all that kind of thing, it's an educational thing, but it's also like, you know, watching that penny drop, isn't it? And people really appreciating where things come from and making that connection, you know. So so that'd be brilliant. So I just hope you can design all the cities around the world. Can you start with ours, please?
That would be nice. Thank you.
Lovely. Well, my final question, which is this sort of magic question. I think you've kind of like sort of touched on that with the sort of the biophilic cities element, but just kind of like in summary kind of thing. If you could paint the world with a magic brush of biophilia, what would it look like?
Yeah, that is very cool. That was a very fun question. I've done this like we've done this like Photoshop render of the city that we live in, Auckland, and it's like you see a photo of the city and it's like very concrete, gray, and then we've overlaid like just boom, like green walls, green roofs over the whole thing, and we use it as kind of like this like example of going, hey, this is what we want to do for Auckland. And I think it would look something like that, but it would definitely involve a productive side where, you know, people can walk to work and pick fruit off a tree on their walk to work, and have an apple on the walk to work, or pick some vegetables on the way home and bring them home for dinner. Like I think that would be very special. Yeah.
Thank you for listening to the Journal of Biophilic Design podcast.